The beginning of a friendship. Opening scene, a chance meeting at Columbia University. The story opens in the vibrant fall of New York City, on the campus of Columbia University. Emily Parker, an ambitious, diligent freshman from a small town in Massachusetts, is adjusting to the overwhelming pace of city life. Wandering the halls after her first lecture, she gets lost and bumps into Sarah Miller, a confident, outgoing classmate who has lived in New York all her life. Their initial conversation is a mix of nervous humor and honest vulnerability, laying the groundwork for a sincere connection. Forging their bond, roommates, study partners, and confidants. Through a twist of fate, Emily and Sarah are assigned as roommates in a cozy but cramped dormitory.
Pleasure to work with you.
Late-night study sessions become the norm, turning into deep talks about their backgrounds, hopes, and insecurities. Emily admires Sarah's social ease and city savvy, while Sarah feels inspired by Emily's quiet determination and sharp intellect.
I understand.
Together, they support each other through homesickness, academic pressure, and the uncertainties of early adulthood. Shared milestones and celebrations. The narrative details key moments in their college friendship, pulling all-nighters during finals, celebrating their first internships with a splurge dinner downtown, helping each other navigate first heartbreaks, and cheering on personal victories. Photographs lining their shared wall capture these milestones. Two young women growing together, their differences complementing rather than dividing them. Early signs of deep attachment. The chapter highlights how Emily and Sarah become each other's primary source of support. Emily's reserved nature finds balance in Sarah's extroversion. They spend holidays together when Emily can't fly home, and Sarah's family welcomes Emily as one of their own. The two vow to always have each other's backs, exchanging matching bracelets as symbols of their unbreakable friendship. Foreshadowing. Small cracks in perfection. While the warmth of friendship dominates, subtle moments hint at future turbulence. When Emily outshines Sarah in certain classes, there is a fleeting look of envy in Sarah's eyes, though quickly masked by encouragement. A mutual promise to never let anything come between us is made, but in the privacy of her own thoughts, Sarah sometimes wonders what it would be like to step out of Emily's shadow. The promise of a shared future. The chapter ends with both graduating together, arms entwined and beaming with pride. Both secure, promising jobs in Manhattan, Emily at a prestigious architectural firm, Sarah in public relations.
Sarah knew, right?
Their friendship, tested and strengthened by years of shared experience, enters the adult world with the promise that nothing will ever break their bond. A perfect marriage? A new chapter. Emily meets David. After graduating and settling into her demanding job at a prestigious Manhattan architectural firm, Emily throws herself into her career with the same quiet intensity that brought her success in college. Amid late-night deadlines and networking events, she meets David Carter, a charismatic entrepreneur with a reputation for kindness and ambition. Their first encounter, at a mutual friend's art gallery opening in Soho, is serendipitous. David's wit and genuine interest in architecture quickly catch Emily off guard. Their chemistry is immediate, and their initial conversations are filled with curiosity and mutual respect. Falling in love in the city. As the leaves turn and New York becomes dusted with early winter snow, Emily and David begin dating. Their romance evolves naturally, marked by simple joys, long city walks, cozy dinners in tucked-away restaurants, and deep conversations about aspirations and fears. David admires Emily's work ethic and kindness. Emily is drawn to his vision and supportive nature. Sarah is there for Emily as a sounding board, encouraging every step and always eager to hear each detail. Sarah's role, the cheerleader and silent observer. Sarah, now building a promising career in public relations, is Emily's
Company started
confidant
cutting
and
corners,
bridesmaid
and then my
to-be.
health began to
She helps
decline.
Emily plan the
I
engagement
lost my
party,
job
offers
and then my
styling
apartment.
advice, and goes wedding dress shopping
This is
together.
what we found.
Sarah showers Emily with words of encouragement and heartfelt wishes, always the life of the planning committee. However, in quieter moments, subtle signs of unease flicker beneath her outward enthusiasm. A fleeting sigh when Emily shares honeymoon plans, an extra glass of champagne she lingers over alone at bridal events. The dream wedding. The wedding itself is a breathtaking affair set at a historical estate on the Hudson River. Friends and family fly
I don't
in
know
from
what you're
across the
talking about.
country, and Sarah stands by Emily's side as maid of honor, delivering a moving toast and holding Emily's hand before she walks down the aisle. The ceremony is a blend of laughter and tears, symbolizing new beginnings and deep roots of friendship. Photographs capture Emily and David's pure joy, as well as Sarah's committed, if slightly strained, smile. A promising start, marriage and friendship. Intertwined married
She was very
life
interested
brings
in
new
Emily's
changes and
clients.
shared routines. Emily and David move into a high-rise apartment overlooking Central Park, where weekend mornings are spent on the balcony, and weekday evenings are filled with discussions about careers, dreams of starting a family, and travel plans. Sarah remains a constant presence, visiting often, organizing couples' dinners, and continuing her role as Emily's closest friend and supporter. First glimpses of tension, underlying rivalry. As Emily's career excels, her firm entrusts her with increasingly important projects. Subtle hints of rivalry begin to surface. During a celebratory dinner for Emily's latest promotion, Sarah's congratulatory hug is just a touch too tight. Her compliments are tinged with irony, almost imperceptible to everyone but Emily. There are comments about how easy things seem to fall into place for Emily, quickly shrugged off as jokes. In private, Sarah grows more restless, feeling overshadowed by Emily's professional
The case
and
is
personal
officially
successes. Shifting dynamics and a hint of distance. Emily, preoccupied with her new responsibilities and David's occasional late nights at work, doesn't quite notice these subtle shifts in Sarah. Their once nightly calls dwindle, replaced by quick texts and voicemail messages. Sarah, feeling sidelined, throws herself further into work and begins confiding in David about her frustrations, always, ostensibly, in an effort to help Emily navigate the pressures of marriage and career. Both women, still loyal in their hearts, sense something unspoken, quietly stirring beneath the surface. Chapter closure, foreshadowing change. The chapter closes on a festive note. Emily and David host their first anniversary party, Sarah at the center of the celebration as always, their trio encircled by laughter and clinking glasses. Yet, as Emily blows out the candles on their cake, something subtle shifts in the air. A moment of disquiet passes between Sarah and Emily, unnoticed by the crowd, hinting that the perfection of this new chapter may not last forever. Hidden secrets, a subtle shift in behavior. In the months following Emily and David's wedding, Sarah begins to embed herself more deeply in their lives under the guise of friendship. Her messages become more frequent, layered with genuine concern, but sometimes laced with veiled questions about Emily's work, relationship, and even finances. She often offers to help out when Emily is busy, sometimes staying late at Emily and David's apartment, under the pretense of planning events or catching up. The professional intrusion. Sarah expresses a sudden and keen interest in Emily's burgeoning career. She asks detailed questions about Emily's new projects, key clients, and sensitive strategies at the architecture firm. Sarah goes as far as befriending some of Emily's colleagues at networking mixers or industry events, always presenting herself as Emily's biggest supporter. With her charm and PR skills, she slyly gathers confidential information, convincing coworkers to share what Emily herself would never disclose. Building trust with David. Meanwhile, Sarah invests extra effort into gaining David's trust, showing up at his startup's launch parties and volunteering her PR expertise. She positions herself as someone who understands both Emily and David, offering advice about marriage and managing professional stress. David, grateful for her help and not suspecting any malice, sometimes shares details about Emily's anxieties or frustrations, believing Sarah's support will smooth things over. Sowing seeds of doubt. Small but significant disruptions begin surfacing in Emily and David's domestic life. Misunderstandings develop over trivial issues, forgotten appointments or unsent messages, each somehow traced back to a miscommunication where Sarah was involved. Emily's workload becomes heavier as she takes on high-profile projects, and when things go wrong, Sarah always seems to be conveniently nearby, offering comfort while subtly stoking Emily's doubts about the loyalty of colleagues and David's work commitments. Breach of privacy. Emily's sense of privacy erodes as Sarah grows bolder. Sarah, accidentally, sees an email about a confidential client pitch or happens to hear a tense phone call with Emily's boss. She keeps meticulous notes, ostensibly to help if anything comes up. But this information quietly begins making its way to competitors or gets leaked in ways that harm Emily's chances of advancement. Emily is initially oblivious, chalking up these setbacks to bad luck or office politics. Strains within the family strains also start to show in Emily's extended family relationships. Conversations with her parents feel tense, as details Sarah was never told begin surfacing in family discussions. David sometimes seems distant, his trust in Emily subtly eroded by Sarah's careful remarks about work-life balance or Emily's supposed secrets. The sense of security that once defined their marriage grows precarious, though neither fully realizes the source. Sarah's rationalizations. From Sarah's perspective, her actions feel justified. She tells herself she is owed recognition for all the ways she has propped up Emily over the years. In moments alone, she journals about hidden grievances, times she felt overlooked, taken for granted, or quietly dismissed. Her sense of entitlement grows. Every secret she uncovers and every small victory gives her a greater sense of power and control over Emily's life. Cliffhanger, gathering storm. As the chapter draws to a close, a series of events sets the stage for crisis. A major client withdraws from Emily's firm without warning. An unflattering rumor about her professional integrity circulates in the industry, and David's mood becomes suspiciously withdrawn. Emily, feeling a growing sense of isolation and confusion, turns to Sarah for support, not yet suspecting how carefully orchestrated the destruction around her truly is. The shock of betrayal. Emily awoke to an ordinary Thursday in Manhattan, the kind of gray, misty morning that seemed to urge her to stay in bed a little longer. She rose, already behind on sleep, and tried to shake off the sense of mounting pressure. The past weeks had been relentless. Missed deadlines at the architectural firm, a slew of tense emails, and the unrelenting sense that something was spiraling out of control. David had left for work before sunrise, leaving a brief note and a cooling cup of coffee. Sarah's text blinked on Emily's phone. But the message that should have soothed her only made Emily's stomach clench. Sarah had been everywhere lately, helping, organizing, fixing things. And yet, cracks had begun to open, letting in doubts she could no longer ignore. "I'll see you soon. Don't worry. Everything will work out." A growing unease and signs of distress. At work, Emily's colleagues averted their eyes. Lindsay from HR, whom Emily had once confided in, seemed reluctant to speak to her. The project leads held side conversations that ceased the moment Emily entered the room. When the firm's managing partner called Emily into his glass-walled office, she tried to steady her breathing.
where we are going to create
Emily,
something amazing.
he began, sliding a file across the desk. I'm
I've
afraid a
betrayed your
client has
trust,
raised concerns
and
about
for
your
that, I
approach
am
to the West
truly
48th
sorry.
project, and there have been rumors. Emily felt the room spin. The West 48th contract was the biggest of her career, her opportunity for a long-anticipated promotion. She stammered a defense, but even as she spoke, she saw snippets of her own words, emails, confidential reports, repeated in the partner's statements, twisted and misrepresented. I thought this information was protected. I never shared anything outside the team. Back at her desk, she called David. He answered, distracted and curt, then quickly wrapped up the conversation, claiming an urgent call. A cold sense of abandonment crept in. She turned instinctively to Sarah. Can we meet tonight? I need to talk. The unraveling of trust. That evening in their favorite wine bar, Sarah arrived flushed and effusive, talking about her upcoming media campaign as if nothing were
I
wrong.
feel so much
When
stronger
Emily
now.
voiced her anxieties about the breach at work, Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. You know, everyone's under stress.
Oh my gosh,
Maybe
that's
you're just too hard on
hilarious.
yourself. Emily,
No, it's
raw
really
and
not.
worn, could only nod. Still, something in Sarah's tone prickled at her, a hint of satisfaction flickering behind the concern.
David.
The discovery. The next morning, Emily returned home early after a sleepless night and a sudden, uncontrollable urge to escape the isolating office. She unlocked the apartment door and entered quietly, expecting to find the place empty. Instead, muffled voices echoed from the bedroom, the last place she expected to find anyone. Her name was spoken, softly, not by David, but by Sarah. Emily froze, unable to move for a long moment. The initial confusion snapped into sickening clarity as she pressed herself against the wall, her husband's laughter,
Oh,
Sarah's
Emily, it
familiar
is so
tone
good
too
to see
intimate,
you. You've
the
done
words
so
too
well for
soft.
yourself.
A cold,
you too.
electric shock raced through her. She turned and left, the echo of their voices chasing her into the silent corridor. She walked the city for hours, numbly tracing memories over sidewalks and through parks, clenching her phone but unable to call anyone. By evening, she forced herself to return, steeling herself with the hint of hope that there might be an innocent explanation. When she confronted David that night, the truth spilled out in fragments and apologies. Emily's heart beat so loudly she could barely hear his excuses. Sarah's mask slips. Sarah arrived later, breathless and red-eyed, acting as if nothing had changed.
Did you
Emily,
really think he
I
would
can
not
explain.
confess to his actions, Sarah?
The lies tumbled out clumsily. Deep inside, Emily felt the sting of every manipulation, every sideways glance, every moment Sarah had volunteered to cover for her or suddenly appeared at their apartment. It all clicked into place with brutal finality. You ruined my marriage,
I just want to tell
Emily
you something.
whispered, barely recognizing the trembling in her own voice. And you stood there smiling, pretending to be my friend. Sarah's tears came, but Emily only felt ice inside. But Emily's composure, held together by sheer will, finally cracked. Was this your plan all along? Sarah's defenses rose. No, I just wanted to help. You were so busy, so overwhelmed. David needed someone to talk to. The final blow, career sabotage. Just as the betrayal with David threatened to pull Emily under, a storm erupted at her firm. A high-stakes client called, furious about leaked designs and unethical practices. Word spread overnight. Emily's reputation was under attack. Colleagues shunned her. Partners called for an emergency meeting, and soon she was summoned again to the managing partner. We have evidence that these files were sent from your account to a competitor, Emily. The timing aligns precisely with confidential discussions, he said, sliding hard copy printouts across the table. Emily's defenses crumbled. She had locked her computer, trusted her email, but everywhere she turned, her own credentials were weaponized against her. Despite her protests, the investigation was swift and merciless. Under mounting corporate pressure and negative press, the decision came within days. Emily's contract was suspended. Her career, once her greatest source of pride, was stripped away in what felt like a calculated strike. Abandoned and alone. The days that followed blurred together. David vacated the apartment, leaving only boxes and broken apologies. Friends from work stopped calling. In her darkest moments, she scrolled through old photos, Sarah's arm tightly around her shoulders, David's smile broad, both shining in the early days of their connections. It felt like looking into someone else's life. Rumors escalated. Emily had betrayed her company. She was unstable, unreliable. The support network she'd built over a decade collapsed. Realizing Sarah had once again called to check in, Emily threw her phone across the room, sobbing. The depth of despair. In the echo of empty rooms and silence, Emily finally allowed herself to grieve everything she'd lost. The betrayal cut deeper than any setback at work, the violation of her trust, the destruction of her marriage, the weaponization of her deepest insecurities. Looking at the city skyline, through tear-blurred eyes, she felt a bitter mix of rage and exhaustion. Still, amid the sorrow, a thin, steely thread of resolve began to take root. This was not how her story would end. End of chapter. Emily's world, once so solid, now lay in ruins. But as she packed her most precious belongings and closed the apartment door behind her, a quiet determination steeled her heart. The pain from betrayal was raw and absolute. But in those ashes, the first faint embers of strength began to glow. Without knowing exactly how or when, Emily made herself a promise. Those who destroyed her would one day understand the full cost of their treachery. The mysterious disappearance. Emily stood alone in her now empty apartment, the ghosts of her past echoing in every bare corner. A half-packed suitcase lay open on her bed, surrounded by the carefully chosen fragments of a life that only weeks earlier had felt unshakable. A favorite college sweatshirt, family photos stiff with old tape, the delicate silver bracelet Sarah once gave her at graduation. She paused, running her finger over the bracelet's engraving. She hadn't slept in days. Every time she closed her eyes, the same scenes replayed. David's betrayal, Sarah's tears that felt like crocodile lies, the humiliation at her firm, her own lonely voice straining for explanations no one would believe. The world she had built, brick by brick in the cutthroat heart of Manhattan, had collapsed in a swirl of rumor and silence, leaving her shivering beneath the ruins. Forever friends. The irony cut deep, and with shaking hands, she dropped it into a drawer, out of sight. The last goodbyes. That morning, Emily composed brief emails to her parents and younger brother. She told them she needed distance and time, made vague promises to check in once she was settled. For friends, what few remained, she left apologetic texts about needing space and focus. When the last message was sent, she powered down her phone and dropped it in the trash, severing her last tether to the life she'd known. She left a simple note for David, though she doubted he'd find it for days. Keys and ID in her pocket, Emily took one last look at the skyline from her window, a city glittering with opportunities that now felt impossibly distant. Then, with a deep breath, she slipped into the hallway, leaving her old life behind without a backward glance. Stepping into oblivion, New York City was both a labyrinth and a refuge for the invisible. Emily switched hotels every few nights, paying in cash. She cut her hair short and dyed it a practical, nondescript brown. She traded her designer clothes for jeans, hoodies, and worn sneakers picked up from thrift stores in neighborhoods she'd never visited before. Days bled into each other. She spent afternoons wandering aimlessly through museums and parks, sitting for hours on remote benches in Riverside Park, or blending in with the breakfast crowd at cheap diners in Queens. She breathed in anonymity like a balm, learning to drift beneath notice as easily as a leaf in the Hudson River. Each evening, she scrolled job boards for temp work under a new alias, waitressing, dog walking, sorting books in a warehouse. For the first time in years, no meetings awaited her in the morning, no deadlines pressed her forward. The silence was jarring at first, a vacuum echoing with her own doubts. But eventually, she found comfort in the simple routines of physical labor and quiet observation. Wrestling with pain, alone at night, Emily wrestled with the jagged edges of her pain. She kept a battered notebook by her motel bedside, pouring her grief and rage into page after page. Diagrams of what went wrong, lists of questions with no answers, angry pencil sketches of Sarah and David's laughing faces. Sometimes she woke sobbing. Other times, so numb she wondered if she'd ever care about anything again. She replayed every moment with Sarah, every missed red flag. Had the envy always simmered under the surface? Were there signs in the way Sarah had joked about Emily's successes? Offered to help manage her calendar? Shadowed her at networking events? Rage and self-blame tangled inside her until she'd slammed the notebook shut with a trembling hand. The only answer, a haunting silence. But layered beneath the agony was a gathering strength. The city outside pulsed with possibility. Her old ambition refused to fully die. Each morning she forced herself out of bed, vowing to survive, even if she had to disappear completely. At least until the game had changed and she could shape the next move. Sarah and David. Life without Emily. In Emily's absence, Sarah and David's world was not as golden as they'd imagined. David threw himself into his startup, working 13-hour days and filling every moment with anything that numbed the guilt. Late-night coding, business lunches, forced laughter at networking mixers. He avoided coming home, each silent apartment a reminder of everything he had lost, and the shadow of a betrayal that even Sarah's reassurances couldn't dispel. Sarah, meanwhile, wore her victory like armor. She moved into a glossy new apartment, claimed Emily's old connections, and charmed her way into interview panels and PR launches at high-profile firms. At first, friends and colleagues flocked to her energy, and she relished her role as a social and professional star. But cracks began to form. As whispers spread about Emily's downfall, Sarah found herself the target of subtle questions and more pointed doubts. Her charm met with wary smiles. Her successes seemed to fade faster than she could build them up. Alone in her glossy kitchen at midnight, the taste of triumph soured with every unanswered message and every glance in the mirror. She sent Emily emails that bounced back, Facebook messages that vanished unread, voicemails that never received a reply. "I just want to explain," she said in one midnight recording, her tone desperate beneath the practiced confidence. "We can go back to how things were, can't we?" But the silence on the other end was absolute, a fortress she could never breach. Seeds of renewal. Weeks passed, then months. Emily's hair began to grow out again, and the edge of her pain dulled to a manageable ache. She made friends with a retired librarian who volunteered at the shelter where Emily started cleaning in the mornings for cash, and chatted with a single mom who worked double shifts at a bakery. These connections were tentative, built on small acts of kindness shared over coffee or the exchange of favorite paperback novels. She found herself longing, hesitantly, for justice. Not revenge for its own sake, but for the reckoning that would restore her dignity and reveal the rot at the heart of what she'd lost. She realized she was not alone in her suffering. The city was filled with people who had been betrayed, knocked down, forced to rebuild from nothing. She read their stories, drew strength from them, and began to search for legal advice and ways to gather evidence without tipping her hand. One rainy afternoon, as she sat watching traffic blur past a cafe window, She recognized something sharp and alive flickering beneath her exhaustion, a determination to remake her life on her own terms and to answer every betrayal with truth. "They might have broken me," she whispered, nearly surprising herself, "but they do not get to write my ending." End of chapter. Emily rose from her seat, her shadow long on the wet sidewalk, and slipped into the crowd. She was invisible, yes, but no longer lost. Each step took her further from the ruins of her old life and closer to the plan quietly taking shape in her mind. Her disappearance was never meant to last forever. The calculated return. Nearly a year had passed since Emily Parker vanished into the anonymity of New York's crowded streets. For the world, she had simply disappeared, her social media dormant, her professional networks silent, her old haunts as empty of her presence as if she'd never existed. Yet beneath her invisibility, Emily was transforming. The woman who stared back from the smudged mirror of a budget motel room no longer bore the softness of a dreamer, but the sharpened eyes of someone who had learned, painfully, how to survive and adapt. Reinventing herself gone was the flame-haired architect with a taste for tailored suits and downtown restaurants. In her place stood a woman with cropped espresso hair and a deliberate bearing, strong, observant, calculating. Emily drilled herself in skills she'd neglected for years: digital research, document forensics, shadowing people through the labyrinth of Manhattan. She took night classes in legal basics and cybersecurity, her days a marathon of menial jobs and whispered conversations in corners of library basements. Every moment of her exile, Emily had stored away knowledge about people, about systems, about the cracks in even the most unassailable facades. She taught herself to move without drawing attention, to listen when others needed to talk, and most importantly, to watch for patterns of power and betrayal, like storm warnings on the horizon. Emily nursed her anger carefully, letting it harden into determination. She had no intention of returning simply to confront her detractors or air her ruined reputation in public. She would come back to reclaim her life, step by strategic step, and expose those who had conspired against her. Mapping out a plan. Her first move was to quietly reestablish a digital presence, this time with caution and intent. She created an alias, Eden Lay, to join online architecture forums and professional groups, watching trends in the industry and collecting whispers about her old firm. She traced board membership changes, tracked project leads, and paid special attention to sudden stories in the design press about legal troubles or failed deals. Slowly, Emily contacted people from her past, carefully chosen, always through encrypted email or a burner phone. She reached out to a former intern from the architecture firm who'd admired her work and left months before her scandal. Their meeting in a quiet Harlem cafe was brief and laden with shadows. "I always thought something was off," the intern confessed, sliding across a USB drive filled with fragments of messages and meeting minutes he'd saved out of loyalty. "The way Sarah hung around your office, the times she borrowed your key card after hours. They said you'd sabotaged the contract, but I never believed it." Gifted with these digital breadcrumbs, Emily began building a timeline. Where had Sarah been? And when? Who had access to what documents? And how did leaks correlate with Sarah's sudden career leaps? Strategic reconnections. The next step was to reconnect with those few allies untouched by the old scandal. Emily found her way back to Ms. Weller, a retired architecture professor who had once mentored her through an undergraduate honors thesis. Ms. Weller lived quietly in Brooklyn, running community architecture workshops for disadvantaged youth. Over tea, Emily shared fragments of her story, her wrongful downfall, her suspicions, and her need for resources and legal support. "You always did your best thinking under pressure, Emily," Ms. Weller said, her gaze fierce with pride and concern. Let's get you in touch with someone who can help clear your name, and not just in the court of public opinion. Through Ms. Weller, Emily was introduced to a network of legal professionals and whistleblower advocates, all well-versed in corporate sabotage and digital evidence. They helped her chart the boundaries of what was admissible in a court case, what needed corroboration, and how to gather proof discreetly. Together, they strategized not as victims, but as chess players, anticipating Sarah's and the firm's every countermove. Testing the waters. Emily's first test of her restored confidence was both small and symbolic. She anonymously tipped off a journalist about irregularities in a newly launched project credited to Sarah. Within weeks, a piece appeared in the industry newsletter, raising quiet questions about plagiarism and internal conflicts within the PR team. Sarah, who had comfortably occupied Emily's old place in the public spotlight, was blindsided, not enough to topple her, but enough to rattle the foundation. Buoyed by this, Emily ramped up her efforts. She observed Sarah at panels and industry networking events, joining webinars under assumed names and noting which stories Sarah told, what successes she claimed as her own. The things Sarah omitted, the handful of projects Emily had designed but now saw listed conspicuously as Sarah's collaborations, became crucial clues. Gathering evidence. Emily became a methodical collector of proof. Swapping her old emotional vulnerability for a forensic eye, she documented every instance of misattributed work and every shift in Sarah's narrative. She partnered with the legal team to approach former colleagues anonymously, offering protection for evidence that would prove sabotage. Unauthorized email access, suspiciously timed data breaches, even installation of monitoring software on her old company laptop. She cataloged photographic evidence, metadata, and calendar logs. She met with a data recovery expert in a nondescript office on Canal Street, retrieving files from a salvaged backup hard drive she'd once kept, just in case. The files contained time-stamped drafts that refuted the timeline the firm had used to indict her. Building momentum. While Sarah continued to bask in public success, Emily's campaign intensified behind the scenes. Small failures and PR disasters began to creep into Sarah's portfolio. A pitch lost to an unexpected competitor, a press release that backfired spectacularly, invitations to key conferences quietly rescinded. Emily felt a pang of guilt for the satisfaction she took in each stumble, but reminded herself this was justice, not vengeance. She protected herself legally at every step, aware that one reckless act would jeopardize everything she had rebuilt. She stayed anonymous to most, her identity shrouded until her case was ready for public light. The moment before the storm. As the chapter drew to a close, Emily stood once again at the edge of Central Park. She was not the naive young woman who had arrived in New York years ago, full of hope and blind trust. Now, she absorbed the cityscape with a strategist's calm, every step deliberate, every move engineered. She was ready, not merely to return, but to reclaim her story and ensure the truth came out, no matter the consequences. Her hands trembled as she dialed her lawyer from a new phone, saying only, "I'm ready. Let them know. Emily Parker is coming back, and I have proof." The game was no longer Sarah's to control. The first moves had been made, and for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself a quiet, hopeful smile. Her comeback had truly begun. The betrayer pays the price. Sarah had always believed in her power to control the narrative. She greeted every industry panel, every smiling group photo, and every interview with the same breezy charm and confidence that had shielded her through years of subtle manipulations. But gradually, the air around her began to change. On a chilly Tuesday morning at her new public relations agency, her name now on the door, Sarah sensed tension when she entered the conference room. Laughter faded. eyes darted. A sinking déjà vu rippled through her as colleagues greeted her with stiff smiles. It began, as many downfalls do, with rumors. Small at first, questions about an uncanny similarity between Sarah's latest branding campaign and a design featured in an architecture publication 6 months earlier. Employees whispered about plagiarized renderings and reused pitches. One week, an old client abruptly withdrew, citing ethical concerns. Another publicly criticized the firm's integrity in an industry forum. Sarah brushed these jabs aside, but her hands trembled at night when she scrolled her emails, noticing the dwindling messages and the absence of invitations she once took for granted. Exposing the truth, one layer at a time.
I'm telling you, it was
Behind the scenes, Emily
You have to
moved with
believe me.
measured precision. Having gathered a mountain of evidence, time-stamped digital files, archived emails, confidential statements from former colleagues, she and her attorneys launched a carefully coordinated campaign. The first blow came not with a lawsuit or a front-page exposé, but a confidential
Did you see
tip
that?
to the board
I
at
think
Sarah's
so.
agency.
No.
The package
I think
included
so.
screenshots, forensic reports, and an anonymous legal letter citing whistleblower statutes. Within days, an internal investigation committee was activated. Sarah was summoned for questioning. Her words, always so deft in spinning a story, stuck in
case
her
is getting to
throat
me.
as investigators threw timeline after timeline at her, each backed by electronic proof. She denied wrongdoing, but with every round of questioning, she found herself chipping away at the contradictions in her own story. Staff members she'd relied on for years now avoided her gaze. Next,
I write to you
Emily's
from the
allies
shadows.
contacted journalists
A
at a
secret.
respected business magazine. A well-researched feature laid out the saga. Rising industry star, mysterious disappearance of a rival, rumors of sabotage and stolen work. The article didn't name Sarah outright, but the hints were unmistakable to those in their world. The story's final paragraphs painted Emily not as a failed architect, but as a casualty of betrayal who was quietly mounting her comeback. The media buzz was immediate. Industry forums debated ethical boundaries. Former clients began phoning about risk management reviews. The collapse of Sarah's public persona. As the consequences mounted, Sarah's once flawless facade cracked in public. At a panel discussion for women in business, an audience member asked her to address the allegations swirling online. Her hands shook as she offered non-answers, her trademark grace slipping with each question. A video clip of the uncomfortable exchange went viral, amplified by anonymous users hinting at her double-crossing history. Inside her company, support evaporated. The board placed her on administrative leave pending investigation. Without her, client defections accelerated. A trusted friend in HR declined to meet her for coffee. Her inbox filled with curt memos from legal and silences from former friends. Desperate, Sarah reached out to David, her last connection to her former life with Emily, but he responded only with clipped replies. He had long ago tired of excuses and the cold warmth that had defined their short-lived partnership. Alone in her penthouse, Sarah reread the old emails she had once been so careful to delete,
God.
searching for loopholes or ways to twist the truth. But the system that had protected her now worked against her.
Don't make a sound.
The digital trail was clear, and Emily's pattern of sabotage was undeniable. Emily's return to light. Meanwhile, Emily's name began to resurface around New York, first in whispered conversations at design studios, then in public endorsement from industry leaders. One by one, key players she had mentored or worked beside spoke up for her, vouching for her integrity and talent. With the support of Ms. Weller and her legal team, Emily filed a formal complaint with her former firm and submitted a portfolio of evidence for arbitration. The hearings were long and taxing, but each session further dismantled the narrative Sarah had spun. Forensic experts demonstrated how project files had been tampered with. Timelines, server logs, and emails showed that most so-called incompetencies were deliberate setups. The core team that had initiated Emily's dismissal quietly resigned or were reassigned. In the end, the board voted to clear her record, issuing public statements acknowledging her unjust treatment and the regrettable breach of trust experienced. Emily was invited to return, not out of obligation, but in recognition of her resilience and skills. She declined, preferring to restart on her own terms, but felt the burden of shame wash away. The offers that trickled in came from other firms, universities, nonprofits, places that valued not only her technical brilliance, but her demonstrated strength. The final unraveling. As word of the
Think you're safe
arbitration
now?
outcome spread, Sarah watched her world collapse. Her agency replaced her name on the door within days. She became the subject of tabloid gossip and professional cautionary tales. Old friends ghosted her. The journalist who once clamored for her opinions now sought Emily's instead.
Excuse me.
Her attempts to contact Emily went unanswered. Her emails filtered, her calls
Based
blocked.
on the markings, this is
At
consistent
night,
with a blunt
Sarah
force
sat
trauma,
alone in her dark
possibly a heavy
apartment,
object.
city lights flickering coldly outside the windows. She thought back on the friendships she had destroyed, the ambitions that had once burned so bright. Regret crept in, though pride still fought for dominance. Alone, she realized the victory she'd stolen had exacted a price she could never repay. A quiet justice. For Emily, justice did not bring gloating or spectacle. There were no triumphal speeches or revenge fantasies fulfilled. Only relief, and the gentle hope that healing from such wounds was possible. She closed the file on Sarah's betrayal, not with bitterness, but with a clear-eyed determination to define her future without shadows. There were emails inviting her to speak about ethical leadership. Fellow survivors of workplace backstabbing reached out, thanking her for shining a light into the gray corners of ambition and power. She accepted some offers, declined others, and spent long walks in Central Park simply breathing, unconcerned for the first time in a year about who might be watching. End of chapter. Emily understood that moving forward meant more than clearing her name. It required forgiveness, not only for Sarah, but for herself, for trusting too easily, for missing the warning signs, for losing so much before finding her own worth again. As for Sarah, her punishment was not only professional ostracism, but the enduring knowledge that the legacy she'd chased so ruthlessly now bore the mark of her own choices. The wheel had turned, and the
I need to know where
betrayer
she is.
had paid her price. A broken marriage. The truth, once it surfaced, spread through Sarah and David's lives like acid. It did not matter that they had spent months weaving lies of omission, convincing themselves that the worst was behind them. With the public revelation of Sarah's sabotage and Emily's vindication, their marriage, once fueled by secrecy and adrenaline, entered a stark and mournful winter. A house divided. Sarah's penthouse, which had felt so victorious the day she moved in, grew oppressive. The rooms felt colder. Windows revealed a city that no longer looked back at her with admiration, but with indifference. David's work at his startup became both his excuse and his shield. He came home late, ate meals standing at the kitchen counter, and retreated to the guest room, claiming late-night phone calls or urgent projects that demanded his attention. Their few conversations were perfunctory at best. "How was work?" she'd ask, voice
All right,
flat.
over there. Let's get this area clear.
The erosion of trust.
Careful now.
But the rift between them was more than circumstance. It was the residual rot of guilt, mistrust, and regret. Even before Sarah's schemes unraveled, fissures had opened. Now, with the world watching and Emily's name cleared in the press, David could no longer avoid the truth of what he'd become complicit in. He found himself replaying those earlier months, the insidious way Sarah made herself indispensable, the nights he justified his connection with her as harmless, the morning Emily had discovered them, her pain a mirror to his own self-contempt. At the time, David had told himself he was choosing love, or at least comfort. Now, all he could see in Sarah was the architect of their ruin. Sarah,
Please, you have
once
to
so
help me. I
full
don't
of
know what to
bravado,
do.
wilted beneath the pressure. Her career had imploded. Her so-called friends in the PR world stopped calling. Invitations vanished, and her inbox remained eerily silent. Being left in silence with David made her acutely aware of what she'd destroyed. Not only Emily's trust, but any honest foundation on which a life with David could have been built. The search for meaning. One evening, desperate to claw back some sense of normalcy, Sarah suggested they attend a marriage counseling session. David agreed, more out of obligation than hope. In the waiting room, they sat side by side but miles apart. Sarah nervously twisting her bracelet, David staring at the faded carpet. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman with patient eyes, asked, "Why are you here today?" Sarah struggled for
No one
words.
else on board?
I want
That's what I'm telling you.
to fix what we broke. I want to understand if there's any chance left." David, jaw tight, was silent for a long moment. "I don't know what I want," he admitted with a sigh. "I just know this, whatever this is,
Yes, I
doesn't
do.
feel like a marriage anymore. We hurt someone I loved. We hurt ourselves. How do you come back from that?" Their sessions over the following weeks became battlegrounds of blame, defense, and exhausted apologies. Sarah tried to explain the desperation,
this, then?
the loneliness,
$20.
the envy that had
I think
driven
it's
her.
worth more.
David described his own emotional drift, his feeling of being swept along, and the guilt that colored every memory he had of Emily. But
I don't know what you're
honesty,
talking about.
instead of healing the wound, only laid it bare. The
That's
more
him.
they spoke, the more it became clear. Whatever connected them had been built on need, not trust, and when the need passed, so too did the illusion of love. Facing the ruins. Eventually, even Sarah had to admit defeat. Their home became a collection of closed doors and unanswered questions. David began spending nights away, sometimes at a friend's, sometimes simply wandering the city until sunrise.
I have to confess everything.
Sarah stopped reaching out, resigning herself to the echo of her own mistakes. They discussed separation
Please place your hand on
quietly,
the scanner.
like two
you.
business partners untangling a failed venture. There were no screaming matches or pitched accusations,
of something here.
just the numb, methodical sorting of shared possessions and the logistics of two lives splitting apart. David moved out first, carrying a single suitcase and a box of old books. He left behind a note, apologetic, careful, final. Sarah stayed for a while in the penthouse, a victory turned prison. She boxed up her career's memorabilia, tossed out the stack of congratulatory cards she'd once displayed proudly on the mantel. Days passed without visitors or calls. The future she had chased so ruthlessly felt hollow.
We must move quickly.
Isolation and self-reflection. Alone, Sarah tried to understand the depths of her motivations.
closed?
She read through her old journals, retracing each moment she'd felt jealous of Emily or insufficient in her own
She
career.
had a distinct scar,
The more she read,
almost like a
the clearer
crescent
it
moon,
became.
just above
Her need for
left elbow.
validation had turned toxic, and her victory was always destined to be Pyrrhic. Regret, at last, caught up with her. Nights stretched into mornings filled with unanswered apologies, sent as text drafts or unsent emails to Emily and even David. These confessions, never delivered, became her only solace. Yet even in ruin, Sarah found a strange, painful clarity. She had lost everything built on lies. It was up to her whether she could someday earn something real by being honest, with herself, and perhaps someday with others. aftermath and moving forward news that Emily's life was
Now
coming
we'll call
together
up
in new and unexpected
character
ways.
B.
Lectures, new projects, supportive friends reached Sarah like distant echoes. She wished Emily well, even if that forgiveness would never be spoken aloud. For David, she hoped he would find the peace absent from their short and tumultuous time together. On a rainy Sunday, Sarah packed a single bag and left the penthouse for good. She gave the keys to her landlord in silence, stepping out into a city that was both unforgiving and, in a strange way, full of possibility. She did not look back. Her marriage to David was over, abrupt and absolute. But in the emptiness that followed, there was room, at last, for something new. Humility, maybe growth, maybe even with time, self-forgiveness. End of chapter. As Sarah slipped into anonymity, she carried with her the weight of betrayal and the hope, faint but persistent, that broken things, herself included, could one day be mended. The truth revealed. The day began quietly, mist rolling off the East River and drifting through Manhattan's avenues. But beneath the calm, tension simmered in boardrooms, newsrooms, and coffee shops alike. The weeks of speculation had reached a fever pitch. Emily Parker's name, once whispered in scandal, was back on everyone's lips. As the clock inched toward noon, Emily sat in a modest office above a bustling law firm. Before her lay not just evidence, but her life's work, a meticulously assembled file of emails, digital forensics, sworn testimonies, and undeniable proof of her innocence. Emily's legal counsel offered quiet encouragement. "You're ready," her lawyer said with a reassuring nod. "No more shadows. After today, the truth stands in the light." With trembling but resolute hands, Emily delivered her file to the review panel at her former firm and authorized its submission to the press. At the same time, her legal team coordinated the release of a public statement and package of evidence to select journalists across major media outlets. Every domino was positioned. It was time to let them fall. Public exposure. Within hours, the storm broke. Leading business websites and morning news stations led with headlines. Social media exploded with commentary, some shocked, some furious, others full of vindication for Emily's steadfastness. Hashtags bearing her name trended for the first time, not as a cautionary tale, but as a rallying cry against workplace betrayal and injustice. Friends who had left Emily's side during her disgrace now sent tentative messages, apologetic, supportive, and sometimes shamed by their silence. She replied to some, grateful for those who reached out with sincerity, but others received only polite acknowledgments. Emily had spent too long in exile to court the approval of all. Former architect exonerated, whistleblower evidence unveils, office sabotage, and rivalry or betrayal. Industry insiders fall from grace exposed. Journalists pored over the encrypted trove. Clear email logs tracked unauthorized logins from Sarah's devices, timestamps confirming who accessed which files and when, chat transcripts documenting Sarah's calculated campaign to undermine Emily, and sworn statements from ex-colleagues who'd finally found the courage to speak up. The World React's public outrage followed swiftly. Within her former firm, an emergency board meeting brought senior partners together. The mountain of proof left little space for denial. Executives issued a public apology, not only exonerating Emily, but admitting systemic failures that had allowed the sabotage to go unchecked. Several managers who had pushed for Emily's dismissal resigned or were removed. Compliance officers promised reforms, while staff gathered in glass-walled conference rooms, shocked and chastened by the events. Industry leaders, many of whom had once cut Emily off or doubted her integrity, made their own statements. An open letter signed by respected architects and professors praised Emily for her resilience and decried the toxic culture that had enabled her downfall. May this reckoning, one letter noted, remind all of us that integrity matters more than ambition, or even sometimes friendship. Sarah's name, once mentioned with admiration at business lunches and galas, faded from invitations and recommended speakers lists. Clients she had drawn to her new agency withdrew, citing fears of further scandal and a lack of trust. Her presence at industry functions shrank to nothing but an uncomfortable memory. The media storm and its personal cost. The onslaught of coverage took a toll on everyone involved. Paparazzi crowded the sidewalk outside Emily's apartment for days, hoping for a comment. She endured harsh questions about her own resilience, about forgiveness, and, inevitably, about whether she planned to take legal action for damages. Emily kept her answers measured. I wanted the truth to be known, not for revenge, but to clear my name and encourage others to speak up. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, survivors of similar workplace betrayals reached out. Confidential emails, LinkedIn messages, even handwritten letters. Some thanked Emily for helping them feel less alone. Others asked for advice, and a few simply said, "You gave me hope." Emily wept quietly over some of these messages, holding each as proof that her suffering had not been in vain. Friends, family, and closure. Emily's family flew in from Massachusetts to support her, hugging her fiercely on the courthouse steps after the public statement. Her parents, whose quiet faith in her had never wavered, cried tears of relief. Even her younger brother, who teased her mercilessly growing up, offered an awkward but heartfelt hug. Former friends circled back into her life, some to apologize, others to simply share a coffee and pretend as if nothing had changed. Emily forgave those who seemed genuine, but she understood now that time and experience shaped a new kind of wisdom and caution. She
Hayes, this is
rebuilt her
crucial.
circle slowly and
Grace,
deliberately,
we've been over this.
prioritizing trust over nostalgia. Sarah's reckoning and regret.
I assure
Sarah,
you,
for her part,
I was
faded
nowhere
into
near
the
the
city's
building at that
background
time.
almost overnight. She received a curt notice of her agency's intent to terminate for cause and faced endless calls from lawyers, her reputation in tatters. Her well-honed public persona
Hello.
crumbled under the weight of scrutiny
Are you
and
there?
digital evidence. Gone were the flattering profiles and offers to speak at conferences. They were replaced by silence and the occasional cold glance in coffee shops and elevators. Oddly, what stung Sarah most was not the headlines or professional exile, but the realization she had lost not just her career, but the only genuine friendship she had ever formed. She typed and deleted dozens of messages to Emily before finally letting her phone drop into a drawer. There was nothing to say that could repair the damage. The value of integrity. In the aftermath, Emily received opportunities she had never imagined possible when she first arrived in New York. Offers to lead design teams, teach university courses, consult on projects that aligned with her
Tell me
values.
everything you saw.
She accepted some, declined others, and found joy in simple things. A quiet walk in Central Park, a potluck dinner with new friends, a letter of thanks from a student she had mentored. She did not forget the pain, the loneliness, or the lessons. But as she stood in the spring sunlight outside her former office, now just another glass tower in a city of thousands, Emily Parker was at peace with her journey's twists and turns. The truth, at last, belonged to her. If there was a message she hoped her story would leave behind, it was this: closing the past, beginning anew. Spring in New York arrived soft and slow, coloring the trees in Central Park with the gentle green of possibility. Emily Parker stood at her window, breathing in the city's early morning promise. It had been nearly 2 years since her world fell apart, and one since she reclaimed the truth. Yet real peace, she realized, came not from any courtroom verdict or public redemption, but from within. A promise to herself. For months after the dust settled, Emily lived with ghosts.
Oh no.
Grief had many faces: anger for what was taken, sorrow for naivete lost, shame for having trusted blindly, and even nostalgia for the life she once thought was hers. What surprised her most was the slowness of healing. Forgiveness was a daily choice, especially when it came to forgiving herself. The city around her rushed forward, merciless and glittering. But Emily allowed herself the gift of small steps. One morning, she began a simple ritual. She would write a single line in her journal: one hope, one gratitude, one promise to treat herself gently.
Everything you need to know.
It was awkward at first, but over weeks, her words became steadier. "Today, I choose to focus forward," she wrote. "Today, I release the weight of the past." Rebuilding a life and a career work returned gradually. Emily declined the high-powered offers that first trickled in after her name was cleared, weary of office politics and industry egos. She found greater satisfaction in rebuilding her career on her own terms. She launched a small design studio, partnering with nonprofits and community organizations, work that was meaningful, if less glamorous. Each project, whether a neighborhood library restoration or an outreach center for teens, reminded her of the architect she'd always wanted to be. Her team grew, drawn by her sincerity and vision. Unlike the competitive environment she'd left behind, her new colleagues valued collaboration and honesty. Mistakes became lessons, not ammunition. On Friday afternoons, they'd gather on the studio rooftop for coffee, sharing stories and laughter. Emily realized she was no longer simply working to succeed. She was working to belong. True friendship. The sting of Sarah's betrayal made companionship difficult at first. Emily found herself flinching at casual compliments, scrutinizing new acquaintances for hidden agendas. But time and the unfailing warmth of a few new friends gradually softened her defenses. She grew especially close to Ava, a resilient social worker she'd met through a literacy project, and Marco, a gentle, eccentric sculptor who always greeted her with a fresh baked croissant from his uncle's bakery. They listened without pity, offered advice without judgment, and never pushed when she retreated behind silence. With them, Emily laughed, confided, and rediscovered the courage to trust. As spring turned to summer, these friendships became her anchor. Gone were the frantic, transactional connections of her old life. These bonds were slow to form, but steadfast, rooted in vulnerability and mutual respect. Sarah's awakening. Across the city, Sarah lived in quieter shadows. Her fall from grace had been swift and merciless. Professional exile, public scrutiny, and the collapse of her marriage to David. For a time, she wandered through each day on autopilot, avoiding mirrors, avoiding friends, drifting from one anonymous temp assignment to the next. But Sarah was nothing if not stubborn. She started therapy, sifting through the ruins of her choices. Most nights, she wrote in a journal, determined to excavate the fears and jealousies that had once driven her. "Why did I become this person?" she'd scribble in frustration. "Is there any way back?" The answers did not come quickly, but slowly she began to understand the emptiness that had led her to sabotage, the hollowness of victories won through deceit. One Saturday, months after the worst had passed, Sarah found herself volunteering at a community garden in the Bronx. The physical act of working with soil, of coaxing something new to life, felt oddly healing. She formed tentative connections with other volunteers: a single mother, a former teacher, a retiree who remembered her from an old gala. These bonds, too, were fragile, but Sarah chose honesty each time she was tempted to retreat into old habits. She still missed Emily, missed the ease of their early friendship, the inside jokes, the sense of belonging. Regret lingered, but Sarah no longer sought forgiveness to ease her conscience. Instead, She focused on becoming someone worthy of trust, if only for herself. Letting go on a bright July afternoon, Emily received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sarah's note was simple, devoid of excuses or justifications. Dearest Emily, you owe me nothing. I just wanted to thank you for teaching me, through your pain, not your words, what real strength and kindness look like. I am sorry for everything. I wish you the joy and peace I once envied, and I am working, day by day, to be a better person. All the best, Sarah. Emily read the note twice, her eyes stinging. For a long time, she said nothing to anyone about it, simply folding it into her journal. She felt no urge for revenge, no bitterness, only a gentle hope that, like herself, Sarah might also find the road back to wholeness. Embracing the future one breezy Sunday, as sunlight danced across the
Finally,
Hudson,
the last piece.
Emily hosted her first real gathering in years. There were no social climbers, no whispered agendas, just friends, laughter, music, and the quiet comfort of being known. When the conversation slowed, Emily stood and offered a toast. To second chances, she said, voice clear and sure. To letting go of what's gone and making something beautiful from what's left. In the days that followed, letters of gratitude continued to arrive, from clients, students, and even strangers who'd read her story online. She replied to as many as she could, reminding each person, a survivor of injustice, a woman rebuilding her life, a young architect afraid to speak up. That strength is not the absence of failure, but the refusal to let pain define you. Through it all, Emily learned, and taught by example, that healing was a journey, not a destination. Some scars remained, tender but instructive, reminders of battles fought and lessons won, endings and beginnings. As summer faded into gold, Emily stood on the rooftop of her studio beneath a sky stitched with city lights. She felt whole, not in spite of her history, but because of how she had faced it. In the hush of the evening, she whispered a quiet promise to the city and to herself. And with that, the past was not erased, but folded gently behind her, making space at last for all the mornings still to come. Whatever comes next, I will greet it with courage, compassion, and hope.